So we have a little bit of time, Mayor Pro Tem.
Just waiting on a couple extra people to log in here, and we'll get started probably about 5 after 5 for all of you, those on the call. For those of you who have logged in, we'll get started in about 2 minutes. All right, it's about 5 after 5. We will have the meeting started. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Raymond. I'm the city manager for the city of Glendora. Appreciate all of you logging in this evening. We understand that many people are still traveling from work or have other commitments. I know there's an all-star baseball game going on this afternoon as well. So this meeting is being recorded. It'll be available on our YouTube page, and we can put it on a link on the city's website as well. There are lots of city staff and the mayor pro tem on the call this evening that can answer any questions. And we'll also have individuals from Athens Services and LA County Fire as well that can help answer any questions. Again, just wanted to say thank you for coming. A little bit overview of what we'll discuss this evening before we do some introductions. We'll have a general conversation on alleys in Glendora. If you're on this call, you've likely received a flyer in the mail, a hand-delivered flyer, seen something on our social media accounts, or talked to one of your neighbors that has been involved in some recent conversations in our community regarding alleys. So I wanted to take the time first and give a sort of a broad overview and talk about alleys as it relates to parking in them and current municipal code provisions, and also talk a little bit about how alleys are defined at a state level. We'll provide a brief overview of actions taken by the city council to date, and including some old policy conversations. We'll discuss some potential alternatives or changes as it relates to alley parking moving forward. We'll talk about any public safety concerns that exist, both from a fire and police perspective. Athens will be able to provide an overview on alley sweeping and trash pickup. We'll talk about if there's a community petition process or process for change, what that looks like, if that question needs to be answered. And then we'll also talk about future plans and give an update on a potential timeline moving forward if there are changes to our ordinances regulating alley parking. And finally, there will be a question and answer period. We'll ask you to use the raise hand feature and or type anything in the chat box. And Greg Morton on the call this evening can help facilitate all the question and answer as well. And with that, wanted to do a brief introduction. And first, though, before we introduce city staff that are on the call, wanted to ask Mayor Davis and Mayor Pro Tem Boyer to please unmute your microphones. Start with Mayor Davis if there's anything you'd like to say to welcome everyone, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond. Just extend welcome to everyone, to all of the residents who have taken the opportunity to be part of this conversation, and also to city staff, the representatives from LA County Fire and Athens. Thank you for being part of this as well. The purpose of us being on here as council members tonight is not to make a decision, but for us to listen to input and to listen to comments from the residents. And at the end of this, hopefully we will be able to take this information back to the council. There may still be more discussion that needs to be had as people process possible options and outcomes. But tonight, our job is to listen and to hear the various perspectives, as this makes a difference to people across the city in a different way. And so we want to find out what solutions are possible that would benefit the most people involved. So again, thank you for being part of this conversation, and I'll turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Boyer.
I just ditto the comments that Karen made and appreciate everybody's participation. The one thing we need to point out is that sometimes we look at things and you think there's a simple solution, but we got to keep in mind some of the parking ordinances here in Glendora have been in place since the 1950s. And any decisions that we end up making, if we end up making any changes, are going to affect the community, every single person in this community for the next 50 years or maybe longer. So we take this extremely serious, and we have to consider all of the options before we make any decisions. I do just want to point out, though, that some of you may have noticed Mendel Thompson and Michael Alois are both on the call as well. Even though they're here observing so they can get the information and hear everybody's feedback. They will not be able to participate in the conversations, but just in case anybody has any questions for them and to understand why Karen and I will be available for questions. Thank you.
And just to add a little bit to that, this isn't a publicly noticed city council meeting. This format allows for a much more free flow back and forth if there are questions. In a typical city council meeting with public speaking guidelines, that you have 3 minutes and not always a response. So here you'll get responses. You can ask questions of the mayor, mayor pro tem, as well as Athens, LA County Fire, and city staff as well. On the city staff phone call this evening, again, my name is Adam Raymond, the city manager. Allison Sweet is our public works director. Jeff Kugel is the community development director. Allison could talk about streets and roadways as it relates to access. And Jeff could talk a little bit about zoning and planning guidelines. Chief Matt Egan is also on the phone call this evening and will do the majority of the presentation. So appreciate his participation in advance. For LA County Fire, I believe we have Assistant Chief Mike Inmans on the call, and for Athens Services, we have Brian Johns, and I believe I see Mr. Clifford as well. Welcome, Gary. And with that, Chief Egan, if you wouldn't mind, please taking over and tell me what slide comes next, and I'll be happy to move it along for you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Happy to be a part of this. These community conversations are always good because, just like you said, the free flow of information and a little less formal is always best to get us over the hump on an issue. Today, I'm going to do a few slides with examples of what alleys look like, definitions of alleys, where we currently stand with alleys from a really high level. And I have, as Adam said, Allison Sweet and Jeff Kugel as my backups. Should there be any questions as we ferry our way through this process related to how an alley is constructed and what zoning regulations are applicable. So let's start off with the basics. What is an alley? And an alley is defined by the California Vehicle Code as being a highway or a roadway not exceeding 25 feet in width, which is primarily used for access to the rear or side entrances of an abutting property. In Glendora, we have about 6.2 miles of alleys, which we were, when we did our survey and we contacted the residents of all of these properties that touch an alley, we actually found there's about 982 addresses. And of those, there's probably another 120 that are either duplexes or triplexes, which have multiple families or multiple residents with one particular address that have alley access and abutment. Alleys generally range from 15 feet to 20 feet, depending on if they're north-south or east-west. For those of you on the call who live in an alleyway or have an alleyway, probably very familiar with that feel. Some feel really wide, some feel very narrow, depending on how properties are aligned to them, including power poles and trash cans and gas meters and bushes and fence lines and all of the things that you do find in alleyways. Alleys are non-directional. They're not striped or delineated or otherwise marked. You can go either way. You can go on different sides. You can park any which way suits your needs, for lack of a better term. Speed limit in an alley is always 15 miles an hour. It's not posted. It's called the prima facie. So on its face value, all alleys are considered 15-mile-an-hour zones. And presently, right now, there's no Glendora Municipal Code that has any alley parking regulations. So other than early morning parking. So there's no time, there's no location, there's no direction, there's no delineation, there's no listed code that has to do with regulating alley parking and an enforcement of that, except for the early morning parking. And I'll discuss that in just a few slides. Next slide, Adam. We'll take a look at the map. We have the city split up into two. That's page 2. If you want to go back there, thank you very much. And when we did our survey, we found that the alleys are broken up into between, I'll have to get my glasses here. Hold on one second here. Between 0 and 2 vehicles parked, 3 to 7 or 8 or more during our random survey that was conducted within the last month. On this map, this is the north end of town. The primary density of alleyways is located in the northwest portion of the city. These are typically smaller lots that are more elongated, stretched out with jointly used alley access ways for garages, access points, entry, and things like that. Next slide, please. In the south end of town, we also have a few alleys. There's an outlier on the far southwest corner, but the main predominance of alleys in the southeast part of town is along Gladstone, and that's from Bradford all the way to Valley Center. The south side of the north side of Gladstone, what would be the south-facing alley, is one of those stretches that is an anomaly. They have no front street parking because it's either red curbed or it's posted no parking, because that's the number 2 lane of westbound Gladstone directly in front of those homes. So those homes are one of the outlier sets in our survey, where all of the homes down there only have alley parking. They have garages and carports and driveways and such based on that. Quick overview: in 1957, Glendora prohibited early morning parking. That was for all cars, 2 to 4 a.m. Monday through Friday, unless you're an emergency vehicle, delivery, or you've purchased a valid permit. And under the code, and this is the one I did speak of, under the code, the definition of a public highway and the prohibition of early morning parking includes all parts of the highway, entire width of the public street, alley, and other sidewalk and parkway for public property immediately adjacent. So in essence, alleyways are considered part of the public highway. They're part of a roadway, and therefore under the municipal code, they would be considered to be prohibited for early morning parking. Next slide, please. Historically, and this is based on my staff report to City Council last month, historically, the practice of limiting cars on the city streets was intended for a better aesthetic look to the community. It also provided unobstructed streets for street sweeping. In that time span, that was a city service, in-house service where city employees used to run the sweepers through the night. So the officers would, parking officers and such, would go out and cite any vehicles that were found on the roadway that did not have a permit or were not granted authority to stay on the roadway. And again, it was meant to, give an aesthetic look. There's also an added public safety value in reducing the number of parked cars. If you're driving down the street and if you're a thief and you're looking for an easy steal, might be more tempted to break into a car parked on the side, on the street, versus venturing up someone's driveway alongside the house and risking waking somebody up. So it had an added public safety value in it. Chapter 10 of the municipal code, and the sections are quoted there. It's 10-12-20 through 10-12-22 has been updated. That's the code that relates to early morning parking. We added a permit program, both nightly and yearly, depending on lot sizes, number of family members at a location. Some of the homes, as stated before by Mayor Pro Tem Boyer, we've got laws in the books that were enacted in the 50s, and sometimes cars of today are not the same size of cars of the yesteryears. And so we have to permit those cars to be on the street because they simply won't fit in driveway aprons like cars from the 1950s. And in the past year with COVID, we also adopted some lesser fees and offered some students who are not in college some permits to stay at home as well. Next slide, please. So here we're going to have an example. I have about 5, 6, 7 examples of different cars that have been found. We drove around, we surveyed the number of cars. We surveyed varying times, varying days, trying to get a good, accurate picture of the scope of how many cars are actually in the alleys. And when we did that, we also snapped some pictures. And so some of these alleys you may or may not recognize, some of these cars you may or may not recognize. But these are good examples of cars in alleyways and what the scope and what it looks like. A lot of people have this impression of what it feels like, and then when you actually see it, you might have a different opinion. So we're going to start down our little run. This is the 400 block of North Glendora Avenue. This is facing south. This is a car parked on what would be the left side of the east side of the alley. So this would be one of those ones that is parked basically if a person's perception is based upon this on the wrong side of the roadway. Next slide, please. Here's a good example of a alleyway that hasn't been improved in quite a while. You can see the asphalt is chipped, and there's portions of gravel to the right that are probably portions of private property, and there's portions on the left that could be private property or public property, depending on where property lines lie, where that trailer is, and where easements for Edison are with that power pole. But as you look north on the street, this is the 400 block of North Vermont. Looking north, you can see our foothills there. There's two cars on the right that are half on probably private property and half on public property. There's another one further down on the left, a silver compact car with probably a third of it sticking out into the public property right of way, but the majority of it is probably in a driveway apron for a private residence up there. It's also a good example. You see trash cans, power poles. This is a really good example for what an average alley may look like and some of the things that we may encounter in it. Next slide, please. 400 block north, Minnesota. So here we have two examples. These are two different vehicles that were parked near the same residence. Both of them are facing south along the west side of the alley. To the one of them, the small black car is over to the right and is outside of the center line edge, which is where rain flow gathers in an alley and is moved away and into flood control channel. The other one is the picture of the same location, but a different vehicle. This is a larger red Ford pickup truck, and this one actually has the truck tires touching the center line, almost at that 50% mark of taking up half of the alley. This is just a representative example so you can see what it looks like. Next example. This is of Gladstone. So speaking of Gladstone, you heard me talk about that the residences that touch the north side of Gladstone, which have the alley along the 1100 block, it's actually 1000 to 1200 block of East Gladstone, all have no front street parking. So all these homes pictured in here, and the picture on the right is the best example. Those are homes on the north side of Gladstone, just west of Valley Center. You can see, if you take your screen or you look closely, you can see the outer edge of the Diamond Ridge Shopping Center off there in the distance. So it's a good example. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cars that I could make out along that edge, and that doesn't account for the cars that are actually on the private property where these homes are at. Oftentimes there's a garage with 1 or 2 cars in them, or a driveway with a carport with 1 or 2 cars in them, and then additional family members or family member vehicles parked in the alleyway as noted in these pictures. Next slide, please. Leodora in Vermont. So here's another thing that we face, both we on the public service side and you as community members, is when your neighbors or your friend or Edison or you name it comes into an alleyway to do maintenance. This is a good example of a contractor or a service vehicle in an alleyway doing maintenance. You can see that they're hugging the left side facing south. This is the north-south alley, south of Vermont, or I'm sorry, south of Leodora, nearest Vermont. Next slide, please. There's this is a delivery driver making delivery drops using the alley. It's a fairly mid-size. I wouldn't say it's overly large, but it's a mid-sized box truck, and it's still on the route, although it's temporarily stopping from place to place through the route using the alley in the 400 block of North Wabash. But this one is a good example of a delivery vehicle. Next slide, please. Oftentimes we find gardeners and other landscapers or other maintenance people, as I indicated, that use segments of public and private alleyways, east-west throughways to park, offload their equipment, service, 1 or 2 residents in the area, and then move along after they're done doing their job. These are vehicles that we do find in alleyways from time to time as well. Next slide, please. This is a good example of some pretty hefty construction being done. This is again the 600 block of North Minnesota. In this particular frame, we have a clear obstruction. We have a black car on the left and a silver or light colored Toyota pickup service truck on the right, including it looks like a Ford utility vehicle ahead of that, all of which have parked in this way, which has made this alley inaccessible. To the right is a good example of a heavy hauler. This is a cement truck making a delivery for a concrete job in the same alleyway. This one was kind enough to have a flag person or at least a spotter in there to provide a gap distance. And even though they're in the alley, there's one side of it is free enough that there is some vehicle passage in there. Next slide, please. A quick summary of actions to date. And if anyone on the call, Jeff or Allison needs to jump in, please feel free. But Allison and her team utilized an engineering firm to survey the alleys. They did a car count, which included some peak time of alley use, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. on weekday evenings. We did it on June 17th and June 22nd, and we found an average of 173 cars parked in the alley. I gave you some photo examples in the previous slides. Those are different scenarios, community members, service vehicles, delivery vehicles, maintenance, and the like. We have offered in certain circumstances alternative parking solutions to community members to ease parking disputes or when there's clearance issues. We have the power to obviously issue permits so that people can park out on the roadway. We've taken appropriate enforcement education when we've had to do so. Most of the time we can come and we can mediate problems and we can get compliance, either get a car moved or get it moved in a certain way that it doesn't conflict with others or make passage in the narrow alleyways appropriate. Council actions to this date, at May 11th, 2021 City Council meeting, Chief of Police, I conducted a presentation on the alleyway parking, but it was strictly limited to early morning parking restrictions. That council meeting, as a result, led to community input and council direction that brought us to today, which is our opportunity to meet with community members, see and hear from you, and listen and get some questions answered, and then council can take direction after that. Next slide, please. So as we look forward, there's a couple of ways that we can go. Just to plant the seed and to get everybody's mind thinking about this, we aren't locked into just these three options, but for starters, looking at this, receiving the information, talking our way through it, we can keep things status quo. We can accept the information, community input, and continue the current policy the way we stand with parking in alleys right now. We could begin overnight enforcement of the early morning parking in alleys. The problem with that, though, is that if a community member wants to park in an alley in the same position that they're parked at normally, they could just buy a permit and do so. So that wouldn't affect the actual cars, the number of cars in the alley. We'd have to navigate that. Or we can adopt an ordinance to further define allowable or non-allowable parking in alleys. And so if we look at it from that lens, we did a little survey of the San Gabriel Valley. We did some close to us and we did some a little further out. And we provided, we have some examples of different code from different cities who address this exact problem. So Azusa is the first one we'll start with, and this is exactly right out of their code. So I'll read it verbatim so that everybody can hear it. And there's slight variations as we go city by city. And this is not meant to be a boilerplate for us to entertain. It's just meant to spur some thought and some This code might work, or this code probably won't work in certain situations. And then we need to look at whether this is applicable to the entire city, or if we're going to do it area by area. So for Azusa, no person shall stop, stand, park, or a vehicle for any purpose other than loading or unloading of materials in an alleyway. And such parking shall not exceed 20 minutes. No driver shall leave less than 10 feet of unobstructed passage. So that's our first example. Next slide, please. Covina's is basically the same thing. It's no person shall stop, stand, or park a vehicle for any purpose other than loading of persons or materials in an alleyway. However, Covina does one extra thing. The city council in Covina provided for an exemption to a particular block, a particular section of an alleyway. I don't know the reason behind it or the rationale, but it's written into the code. So it's just something for you to consider. Pasadena, a little further out, but this one has both the shall not stand, park, or for any other purpose of loading and unloading, but it also puts a time limit on it. Not shall exceed 20 minutes, and in no event shall the driver of the vehicle leave less than 10 feet of unobstructed passage. So that one combines a time limit with the other obstruction that you have to leave 10 feet of passage beside that vehicle and the edge of the alleyway, whatever that might be. Next slide, please. West Covina, same. No person shall stop, stand, or park a vehicle in any alleyway for any purpose other than loading or unloading of persons or materials, except when appropriate signs approved by the traffic committee are erected, giving notice that parking is permitted. So that's a blanket exemption, blanket prohibition throughout the city that you can't park in any alleys unless they post that you can. So it's another alternative view. And then finally, Laverne, no person shall park a vehicle in an alley in such a manner or under such conditions as to leave available less than 10 feet of width of the roadway for free movement of vehicular travel, and no person shall stop, stand, or park a vehicle within an alley in such a position to block the driveway entrance to any abutting property. Again, slight variation. It's just an alternative. It's meant to spur conversation and thought. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to take a pause and I'm going to invite Chief Mike Inman to provide a public safety perspective from LA County Fire. And then I'll kick it over for a little bit of call data and what we do through enforcement options and compliance and such. So Mike, the stage is yours.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I apologize for some of the confusion that I may have transpired out of all this, but I will own that. I misspoke, and at the same token, I was not given the full breadth of the situation. Since then, I've been educated on it much more, and I've invited my subject matter expert, Battalion Chief Rich Stillwagon, to discuss what the actual fire code is and how it relates to what used to be called pre-existing non-conforming. And I'm sure that the code enforcement folks will be very adept at that as well. So without further ado, if Rich is on, if you could have the stage, I would greatly appreciate it.
Good evening, Battalion Chief Richard Stillwagon here, Los Angeles County Fire. I'm in the Fire Prevention Division, East Region. And thank you, Chief Egan, for doing such a thorough history of the streets. That was very good. So the Los Angeles County Fire Code and the State Fire Code really don't address the issue of alleyways. So it defers to the building code and to the California Vehicle Code. And so normally the lead authority or lead agency on that is going to be Public Works, Streets and Roads Division. So we usually defer to them. In the initial phases of building, we're in the land development phase, we're always looking at access, water rights, or access to water, and those types of issues. And those are from the main public right of way or the street side. It really doesn't address the alley point of view. So all of the residences within the city of Glendora have met the fire codes requirements throughout the years. In the old fire codes, back in 2008, 2007 state fire code, the issue is addressed as existing non-conforming, meaning it exists today, but it doesn't conform to the current fire code. And all public agencies are bound by the code in the year they're authorizing construction. That has since been changed to existing. The non-conforming is an old term left over from previous codes. But in your city, in a mature city, we find ourselves in this situation a lot, especially as we get more dense, where codes existed in the past that were more lenient. Codes have gotten more constringent over time. And some of the codes just don't fit what was built in the 1930s, 40s, even prior to that. So in alleyways, in today's world, we try to get 20 feet unobstructed, clear to the sky, rite of passage. However, most cities within LA County's jurisdiction and actually throughout the state of California have adopted this 10-foot rule within city ordinance and adding the alleyways to the streets definition within the municipality. And I think the police chief outlined that very well. So from a fire department public safety standpoint, we normally look at the main occupancy or the house side of a property as the main life threat, especially during those times of sleeping, usually in the nighttime. COVID definitely changed that to all hours of the day with people being home all the time. But that was our main focus, and we were able to safely attack fires and put them out in a short amount of time from the street side. As the state has adopted accessory dwelling units and made the laws more lenient to turn garages into residential structures, we see that a lot around our college areas. It's definitely complicated the issue where our garages tend to be built on the alley side for aesthetics back in the day and even in current times. And now as we transition those into actually public buildings where people are sleeping and residing on a permanent basis, fire department access is necessary in my humble belief. But at the same time, I haven't seen things like fire lanes or anything like that adopted by cities. I've mainly just seen this consistent 10-foot rule. I have seen in the beach areas, I'm thinking of the city of Coronado Island, Rancho Cucamonga. They have actually painted lines on the streets, especially in the alleyways, for parking purposes. To really define the areas where parking is adequate and meets the spatial needs. And I think that's another option to consider and to add to Chief Egan's additional proposals, just things to look outside the box and options for the city council. So for us as a fire department, we normally defer to public works and also the codes that are on the books within the city or by city ordinance. My recommendation from the fire life safety side is that we keep a 10-foot rule as a minimum, because that allows us to get our fire engines within 150 feet of a structure, which allows us to pour hose lines off and really attack fires when they're small and give the residents an opportunity to survive in that 4 to 6 minute survivability life cycle without oxygen, and really getting into these structures fast and putting out the fire small and also getting our victims out safely. Especially in a time as we're getting an elderly population that's growing within all of our cities. And it's getting harder and harder for these folks to get out of their building safely without help. So I really like that proposal as a minimum for the life safety side. Are there any questions?
Battalion Chief, if we may ask one question and clarification, and then we'll ask questions at the end of the presentation for all parties that come. Have there ever been any access issues that you're aware of in the Glendora alleys? I know we'll have fire hydrants and sometimes in the alleyway and sometimes on the street side. Have you had any issue accessing any alleys in Glendora when needed to?
I don't know the recent history. I'm not serving that battalion as a field battalion chief. However, I was assigned out of the Covina Battalion Chief Office, which did service portions of your city, and also with Battalion 2. And there were times that paramedic services or engine companies had difficulty navigating the alleyways or were blocked out. Most of the time for us, it's a time delay. So we can come in from another direction, we can order more resources. But when we're looking at cardiac patients with a 4 to 6 minute life cycle in a cardiac arrest and or fires, time is definitely either heart muscle or survivability within those circumstances. So access is definitely our best avenue. So the answer is yes, but I think it's been on a case-by-case basis and not a normal.
Okay. And the 10-foot rule that you've seen in other cities and is mentioned in a couple of the codes this afternoon, that solves the majority of your access issues if it's that 10-foot rule?
Yes, the most of our apparatus can navigate within a 10-foot area. It's tight with the big fire engines these days. They have grown over time in size, but it does meet our needs, at least to pull fire hose and to get personnel through to accomplish our tasks with raising ladders and those types of things.
Perfect. I'm sure the people calling in this afternoon may have some additional questions for you, and we'll definitely open that up to you as soon as we're finished here in about 5 slides. So Chief Egan, if you wouldn't mind filling out the rest of the PD slide.
Adam, can I pipe
Yeah.
in just for a second on that same subject? Is I pulled all the resources in those areas over the last 6-8 months, and I've had no complaints of any blockage or anything like that. So we did do a little bit of research on that, and to date, there has not been any major delays.
Perfect. I appreciate that very much. Chief Egan?
Thank you. From the police perspective, our goal is compliance. Our goal is to provide the best service we can, but we're limited by the legal definition of what is constituting a blocking an alley and what is not. General rule of thumb in our line of work is, if a person calls to complain about something, we're going to investigate it, we'll take a look, and we'll try to mediate. We do that through education and compromise. We spend a lot of time talking with people. As you can see further down on the slide, in our 5-year call data set, we had 57 calls to police for alley-related parking problems. So 57 sounds like a lot, but when you put it in perspective of our 5-year call datas, for all calls is 184,150 calls for service. It's a pretty small number. And of that number, we've only had to tow 1 car. And we didn't tow it because it was blocking the alleyway. We towed it because it was blocking someone's driveway, meaning their garage, their access, and that person could not get out of their driveway. It was completely blocked by a vehicle. And it wasn't another neighbor, it wasn't a servicer or a contractor, it was an outlier. We don't know how that car ended up in the alleyway. Most of the time, as I state, we have an opportunity to door knock, run a license plate, figure out who that car belongs to, and get some resolution to it without having to tow. Writing a ticket wouldn't do any good because that person would still be trapped in their home, not able to go to work, but they see a car, with a parking ticket on it. So we try to mitigate it in that fashion. We always do notifications and warnings and citation, and tows are, last resort if we need to. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to take an opportunity to, we heard from public safety about what the fire perspective is and the safety margins and what they're bound by and what their perceptions are. The enforcement side of what we can and can't do and what we use as a judging rule for the vehicle code. But I think it's important too that we hear about the other public entity, for lack of a better term, that goes into our alleys. That's our Athens contractors. They do service our alleys both for trash service and refuse collection, as well as street sweeping. So Adam, we have a representative from Athens on the line.
I believe Brian Johns is on to give a brief overview on any challenges or the operations that we have.
We
Brian?
do, Adam. I just wanted to get started real quick and introduce
Perfect.
Brian Joes to the city. Brian's the vice president that is responsible for the Glendora contract. This is Gary Clifford. And I just wanted to reiterate to you guys what a pleasure it is to work with all of the people that work in Glendora, whether it's the police department, the fire department, our EMTs, or just the citizens that are having the issues. Our alley issues are de minimis in the city. We work very well with the other entities to work around those issues, and our people get in and out of the trucks to move things around. We need the same requirements the fire department does for the same size of trucks, but I'll let Brian go over all of those things. I just wanted to say good day to everyone and realize that if you have any questions or comments, you can always email us and Brian will give you that information. So Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. And thank you again to city staff and to the mayor and council for having us here this evening to go on the bullet points that are on our slide regarding routes and schedules. We typically sweep the city of Glendora Monday through Wednesday, and we start at 1:30 a.m. and typically finish about 8 a.m. And then regarding solid waste is for residential customers is a 5-day-a-week operation. We start at 6 a.m. and try to finish up before 6 p.m. and we typically do that. Regarding obstructions and difficult areas that we're at that we have a problem accessing the alleys, I asked our street sweeping supervisor to do an audit of Glendora alleys. And what he found on a typical Wednesday was we had an issue with 8 parked cars that made it difficult to sweep. We had an issue in 16 different areas that were just a little tight for our equipment. And then the other item that we found that made it difficult was tree trimming issues. You know, a lot of times residents forget about the trees that have overgrown into the alley, and it makes it a little bit hard. You know, much like the chief's fire trucks, trash trucks are big vehicles. Then regarding how Glendora compares to other cities. How we compare to other cities. It's to what Chief Egan said. It's pretty typical of our cities to have no parking in there. You know, to the point that he mentioned Covina and West Covina having some specific areas that allow it. It's the issue in Glendora with no prohibition for the most part. It does make it a little bit more difficult, but our drivers that I spoke with, both on trash routes and on street sweeping routes, they found that it's not really a large issue, and that anytime there is something, we can come back and service once that issue has been taken care of. To what Mr. Clifford said, you know, we can move things around if need be. We can get out of the vehicle if we're able to. But anytime we do run into an issue, we want to make sure we keep public works staff in the loop on that so that it's on their radar, and the staff is very responsive to us. And I should mention that I know Fire Chief mentioned about 10-foot clearance needed for our trucks. Speaking with our operations staff, ideally for us, it's about 14.5 feet, just with being able to make it work for us. But that being said, we were able to service customers currently, but we like a little bit wider berth than the average bear when it comes to making our way through those alleys. For the most part, I think those are the larger issues that we found when we were reviewing this with our boots on the ground that service the Gray residents of Glendora.
Brian and Gary, appreciate that very much. And I'm sure if there's questions at the end here, we'll open it up and appreciate your responses in advance.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Do you want me to sort of wrap this up and open up for questions?
I would love it if you would take it from here and then and talk about council direction.
All right, perfect.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. And I know several of you have logged in, about 10 more people than we started with, and just appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us this afternoon. The mayor pro tem are with us and can speak. This is not an official council meeting. So while there may be other council members watching, the only opinions you'll hear tonight are from the mayor pro tem. Since it's not an official council meeting, this format allows for a more free flow of question and answer from those of you on the call this evening. Future plans and options, as the chief mentioned really early, the city's website will be updated with this information for those people who couldn't watch this evening. So they also have an overview and history on the city's alleys. City staff will come back to the city council on July 13th with a report. It'll be a recap of any city council actions to date, and also city policies, for example, non-enforcement of overnight parking in the alleys that have occurred over the past few decades. We'll bring the additional research that we had this evening, the parking survey we had done on a Tuesday and Thursday night, and also a survey of our surrounding communities. We'll take a recap of this meeting and feedback from LA County Fire and Athens Services, and we'll provide the City Council with an update on options, which run the gamut from do nothing to ordinance changes. Just so everyone knows, if the City Council provided staff direction on ordinance changes, those would come back. The second meeting in August, there is a break in City Council meetings at the end of July and the start of August. If there's an ordinance drafted, it's required to have a first reading and a second reading, and then any changes would go into effect 30 days from that date, which is plenty of time for staff to make sure that all the residents who may be impacted by any decisions the City Council makes have plenty of time to make other arrangements. And again, at the bottom, just to make sure that, as was the case this evening, we mailed notice to about 1,000 homes. We hand delivered those notices additionally to about 1,000 homes. We publish the information on the city's website, and we'll make sure in the future to always stay in communication whenever someone may be impacted. So wanted to take this chance to open it up to question and answer. Greg Morton is also on the call this evening and can help facilitate that. There is a raised hand icon. If you don't have access or it's not working for you, you can always use the chat feature, and we'll make sure to get those questions asked. And appreciate LA County Fire and Athens and all the staff on the call this evening in advance for their chance to answer any questions. And with that, we'll open it up for questions of anyone on the call.
Adam, it looks like we've got one raised hand. Also, for everyone that's on the call, if you're having issues with your raise hand feature, you are able to turn on your camera. So if you can't raise your hand, go ahead and turn your camera on and we'll make sure to call on you. We currently have one raised hand, Mr. John Harold. Are you ready for that, Adam?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Harold, you should be getting a request to unmute.
Thank you. Again, my name is John Harold and I live in Glendora. First of all, a wonderful presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we
Can
can.
you see me?
Yes, we can.
And
Yes.
can you see? Okay. Again, I'd like to thank the staff for a wonderful presentation. But I do have one question, and that is, it appears that the vast majority of the surrounding communities do have a restriction on parking in the alley. I was wondering if we can get from them their reasoning and how successful it has been, since they appear to have done it for quite a period of time. And I would assume, since they were around the same time we were, they must have added it or changed to it for some reasons. So I think it would be beneficial for everyone to have that information, particularly going forward.
Appreciate your comments very much. One of the things the chief did is survey other police departments on their experiences with that. Chief Egan, is there any information you'd like to share with that survey? I know.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, speaking directly to John's question about how or why they enacted certain code, I can't speak to that. I can tell you from a law enforcement perspective, the chiefs and administrative officials in the cities that I contacted did find that their alleys are unobstructed. They're free of cars, and when their parking patrol goes through and they do find a car, they do enforce, if it's one of the cities with the time limit, they'll mark that tire and they'll come back 20 minutes later. And if the car's still there, they'll cite it. And if it's obstructing a driveway or obstructing somebody else's property in a manner that they can't access their driveway, then they could tow that car. Often what they find is more warnings and mediation. But what it has done is presented a very clear and unobstructed alleyway. But again, speaking to John's initial question, I can't answer city by city how and why they enacted certain codes and made exceptions in certain cases and certain tweaks as my examples provided.
And I would just add that some of the ordinances in those other cities date back to the 60s as well with those. And so while there may be some staff members around, some of the history is not there, but we'll definitely do our best to try to provide that perspective. Absolutely.
Chief, I just wanted to add also that some cities, some of our more difficult and dense cities like West Hollywood, Hermosa Beach, Whittier, some of those cities actually will just take a once a month time. It'll say like something like maybe no parking third Wednesday of the month from noon to 1, just to mitigate anything. And then once that hour is clear, everybody rushes through and does what they need to do from a quality of life standpoint, whether it be pick up whatever they need to do. And that works too. And it helps mitigate getting tickets when, you know, you're not there doing the work, but they just have a window that that ensures that you're able to get that work done at least once a month. And then the city crew, and then we would follow them through. Not all of them, but that's been a way that very densely populated cities deal with their sweeping.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whittier is a good example of that. They are a densely populated area, and I didn't think about them. Thank you.
But we pick up waste in their alleys and do the cleaning up and do some power washing. So their alleys get some special attention. They would rather have it be in the curbside than the alley.
Understood. Thank you, sir.
Greg, do we have anyone else on the call that would like to speak? Any questions that have come in?
Yes, we have Ron Day Dolder. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Ron, are you there?
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Hi, this is Regina D. Dolder.
Oh, okay.
Well, Regina.
Very good presentation. We want you to know that Glendora is special. We've lived here many years, since 1954, and other places that don't have Athens and don't have our police department, they hurt. So we are very fortunate. But we have two questions regarding the permit program. When it was put into effect, were those addresses told which day they were not to park in the street for the street sweeper and not to park in the alley for the trash? Because this has been part of the problem with the permit program. And the other thing is that when we were helping SPCA for picking up a little coyote that comes up our street that had been attacked, we drove a 14-block radius like you folks have done, and we noticed that there were 33 garages that were filled with things almost to the rafters. So there was no space for a car. And originally we were told that if it's a garage, it has to have a car in it, not parked someplace else. And trailers and so forth behind gates. So those little things, and of course he's right about vehicles getting larger and larger. We've had a number of issues in our neighborhood over the years where people have had to call EMT or the fire department, and with having a narrower street and a narrower alley and parking on both sides, it becomes extremely hard for them to get to the person that needs the help. So,
Regina, I appreciate the questions, and Chief, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about code enforcement in general, sort of to provide the process in which we go in and look at those things, and then any details you can share on the permit parking program and the things that staff look at would be greatly appreciated.
Well, they actually tie directly together. The annual permit that we're referring to is the one that's the $75 per year. On our city webpage, under the police tab, and then drop down to parking, and then a little further down with FAQ, or frequently asked questions, you'll notice that there's a segment called requirements and frequently asked questions. Question number one is, how do I qualify for one? And she is absolutely right. Regina is correct. It says all parking spaces, including garage and driveways, must be used for parking of vehicles and not for storage. So in the event that we have an applicant apply for a permit where they want a long-term yearly permit to park on the street, we would do a site inspection. And if that site inspection yielded something that was contrary to what the qualifications were to being granted one of these, we would deny that permit or ask them to comply within a certain reasonable amount of time. We're not trying to be the bad guys here. And if somebody has a garage that's filled with junk and it's because, a loved one passed away last year and they had nowhere to store it. And so, we're all human and we all understand that there's exceptions to be made. So we work with people and, there's oftentimes we'll grant a month permit while they clean out a garage and then they can accommodate those things. But we do have a certain set of criteria that are required to be met, and we do have some wiggle room. And thank you, Greg, for putting it up there so that everybody can see it. He just put it in the chat feature. You can apply for as many permits as you have vehicles that are over the legal spaces. You can apply. The fillable application is on the internet. We're going to need to see vehicle registration and driver's licenses and such to validate where the car is at. Apartment complexes and RV and trailer parks, we do have some accommodations that we will work through. There's some really small places that, 1 bedroom versus 2 bedroom and what parking spaces are available in certain apartment complex. And so you can go through this and we can talk at each individual one, but speaking directly to Regina's point, the answer is yes. If a garage is full of stuff, it needs to be cleaned out, you need to park a car in it. You wouldn't necessarily qualify for a permit. Does that mean that person can't go just purchase one, a nightly exemption and park on the street? It does. They can do that, but they can't be granted one of our long-term discounted permits unless they're using all available parking. And related to the other question about certain days and times for collection, Athens collection days versus early night parking or early morning parking, it has been and it's been codified. And I'd have to go pull the code to check the exact date of when. I know in 57 they put the law into effect. I'm not sure if that was the exact. If they decided at that point that it was Monday through Friday, 2 to 4, but my suspicion was that it was then. And when it was codified in the 50s, they did not distinguish between refuse collection days and street sweeping days. It was just a blanket prohibition for those time periods.
And Regina, I would just add that from a code enforcement perspective, we're more of a reactive. We don't have a large staff, which that sort of a preemptive look at those areas. If you do have concerns, if you do let us know, staff will definitely head out there and check those issues before you. And I would just also add for the group, while many cities on street sweeping days actually have a car that follows tickets for everyone on the street, we have not taken that approach here in Glendora, and it's not something that we intend on doing. However, if you do have concerns on street sweeping day or trash day that there are cars where they should not be, if you let us know, we'll definitely head out there and take care of the issue for you.
Okay, Adam, we have Ian Weber, and then we have some questions in the chat that I'll ask when Ian is done. Ian, you should be getting a request to unmute. Go ahead and try muting yourself again, and then I'll give you an unmute request. Doesn't sound like your sound is coming through. Try one more time for me. Nope. Give me 1 second here. I'm actually going to put you back in the waiting room and bring you back. That's worked for us in the past. Give me 1 second here. And then, Ian, while we're waiting for you, Adam, Tony Ramirez has his hand raised.
Okay.
Mr. Ramirez?
Hello, can you hear me?
Dan,
Yes.
welcome.
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much for the presentation. I appreciate the issue being addressed on behalf of the city and the PD. My only question is what impact this may have on the citizens of Glendora, the taxpayer dollars, what financial impact this may have on, further enforcement of the issue and, sweeping the streets at night and whatnot from a financial standpoint.
Perfect. So from a financial standpoint, and there are two ways to look at that. If the city has to provide some additional enforcement, if that's the policy direction of the city council at a future meeting, we do currently have a vendor that provides parking enforcement in certain areas on Route 66, for example. It's more frequent than it is on a street like I live on, which is Mita Avenue. So we would look at increased costs if there were additional enforcement opportunities. But first and foremost, as the chief mentioned, we would take an education approach, really try to inform the community, provide warnings well in advance of something coming to fruition, just to make sure that to the extent possible, there are no financial impacts to both the city and the residents. So we would definitely take that education approach. And Greg, if Antonio, it looks like you're nodding your head. Did that answer your question for you? Perfect. Greg, it looks like Ian's back with us.
Yes.
Again.
Let's try Ian one more time here.
All right. Can you guys
There
hear
you
me
go.
now?
Dan, welcome Ian.
So I had a few questions. So the first one is there are some alleyways that you can park on like at least one side and you still have that 15-foot clearance. How would those parkings first be affected?
So just to answer your question briefly, so currently there are no requirements in the code. So if the city council were to take a policy decision and say we'd like 15 feet of clearance or 12 feet of clearance, we'd have to evaluate all the alleys and look at potentially looking at some striping in those areas. One of the challenges is, as you've probably noticed, is some of our alleys are 100 years old. And so sometimes that line of demarcation is not exactly clear. So whatever direction the city council decides to move forward with, staff would definitely utilize resources to do our best to try to make that decision. I think one of the things that we're cognizant of is if we just allowed parking, say, on one side, we wouldn't want it to block someone pulling out of their driveway too. So we'd want to take definitely a step back approach, especially if we went segment by segment, which definitely is what the city of Covina and city of West Covina have done. So we would definitely work with all the different alleyway segments to see what works best.
And second question that's going right off that. If, say, for whatever reason you needed to do maintenance work, would you have those cars be moved to, I guess, a different street, parking for how long the maintenance take, or would they still be able to stay in that area?
So we do work, and Allison, do you mind just taking a chance to describe when there is right-of-way work and an encroachment permit's pulled, the type of noticing that's provided and how far we do that in advance?
Sure. Yeah, this is Allison Sweet, Public Works Director, and we have, as people notice on some alleys, recently resurfaced or done waterline projects, and we notice the public 2 to 3 weeks prior that there will be no parking, but we also work with PD and do not enforce the overnight parking or the 2 a.m. parking in that area. We also work very closely with Athens to make sure that any trash pickup continues. At one time, we did have to put it to the front of the house for for 1 or 2 weeks worth of pickup. So we do work very closely with the residents. We also do a notice. You'll see construction signs where it says no parking. We have to put those up 72 hours in advance. And we can then tow the cars after that time, but the contractor and anyone in the area knocks on doors to try to discover whose car it is. So we do work around, we've had people that have had construction in their alleys, and we'll work closely with them on our timing, and we've been able to accommodate the various situations at each of the homes.
And for my last question is, how to put this? How would you determine which, like I said, mentioned earlier with the alleys, at least one side, how would you determine which one would be the best side for parking and which one would be not the best?
So first of all, that's a great question. And second of all, if you saw the entire presentation, you saw the survey that was done, and we had those heat maps that were there on alleyways that were most impacted. Depending on any policy decision, staff would likely start with those areas where more parking is prevalent and sort of take a look at that and come back to the city council with some recommendations on how to do that. Because you're right, you don't want parking on both sides and have the zigzag approach, it becomes difficult sometimes. So I would say to be determined, but definitely we start in those areas which have a little more heavily historical usage of parking and try to make a best case decision there.
All right, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Brian, if you're on the call, I hear there's a clarification in terms of both height and width for some of the Athens trash trucks when they come in.
Yes, hi. Sorry, just for one point of clarification, the reference that was made to 10 feet for width and a lot of the other cities' codes regarding parking in alleys, or clearance, I should say, we can certainly work with 10 feet. I had mentioned 14 and a half feet, and I should have clarified it. That's more in terms of height. So when we have bigger, taller vehicles to get in, we need to be able to get under power lines and tree branches and all that good stuff. But 10 feet would certainly work for us.
I appreciate any clarification there.
Thank you, sir.
Very much. Greg, do we have any other people that have called in, sent messages?
Yeah, we have one more hand raised. It's Melody Bennett. Melody, I'm sending you a unmute request.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can, Melody, welcome.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions. I think Adam answered the one as far as not being able to park as far as ingress and egress getting out of driveways. I'm a little concerned about Boise and that 9th Circuit when we have something, where we're not enforcing overnight parking and we're having like an issue from what I understand down at South Hills with homeless. Yeah. If we have no enforcement of overnight parking in our alleys, we have no code. How, if we have somebody, because the alleys are open to anybody, it's public, just like, anywhere else. If someone parks there or camps there, let's say it's even just a tent, they're not blocking, what's our recourse?
Sure. That's a great question. For those people on the call, Martin v. Boise was a sort of a watershed moment from a case law perspective on homelessness. And basically, while broad, states that before cities can institute or enforce their anti-camping ordinances, they must be able to provide shelter. And shelter is not necessarily defined, but essentially the city needs to be able to provide a one-night stay before asking someone to move along. And so, Chief, there's several different issues all surrounding homelessness, people in cars. I would just add, Melody, that anytime we do find an individual that is homeless or living out of their car, the city council's actually invested in both some limited time housing options in our local hotels and motels. But we would reach out and make contact with that individual, especially if someone was living in the area. And I'm sure the chief can provide a little more context into individuals living out of cars and where it is allowed and not allowable to sit. But one of our most recent surveys that we had, our most recent homeless survey, did say there are quite a few individuals that actually do live out of their cars in the city of Glendora. When the county stopped enforcing its ordinances, for example, on Arrow Highway, we did see quite a few RVs and other vehicles that generated some calls. And so someone living out of their car is a different set of circumstances, and we would work to address those individually. Chief, anything you'd like to add specifically to our homeless response and the things that we would look at?
Sure. Just real quickly, Melody, if we split it into two directions, your question, we have homeless in a car, as Adam stated, how we handle those and how they would be applicable and is it prohibited to be homeless in a vehicle and to sleep in your car? The answer is no, it is not. But we look at it from that holistic view of offering services. The other side of your question about, say, the thought of a homeless encampment popping up in your alleyway behind your house, that won't occur. We do have code that prohibits people from sitting, standing, lingering in a public right-of-way, a street. They can't do that. If they conflict with vehicle traffic, that's problematic. Sidewalk is another story, but generally we don't happen to have those very often, as long as people can, it's not blocking their path. But in an alley, that's an easy solution. We could definitely address that. So South Hills is a challenge. I'm sure that if you've seen any of our presentations on how we address homelessness there, offering services and coming back a certain time later with cleanups and doing enforcement. We are challenged by the Boise decision, but we are navigating it in a legally sound way. And we're doing the best we can with the county resources that are available to us, combined with our own city resources. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, Greg, if you wouldn't, I'm sorry, Melody. Greg, if you wouldn't mind sharing the homeless services link with the entire group, just in case there are any follow-up questions for anyone on the call, it's never a bad idea to share that information as well.
And then we have a few.
Really quick, Melody, did we answer your question?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, you both did. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Melody.
Mark Davis and it looks like Erica Lamon are both wishing to speak. So Mark Davis, I'm sending you an unmute request. Are you there? Mr. Davis?
Okay, can you hear me?
There you go.
Yep. Yeah, this question is a quick one for Gary and Brian of Athens. Would it be fair to say that restricted access for street sweeping and trash services provides an overall additional cost to the citizens of Glendora?
I wouldn't believe so.
Yeah, it would just be, Mark, it would just depend on whether it changed the routing or not. So the topical answer is it should not. And within the same time that the normal routing was, it would not. If you had to come back and do something special, it could, but you might be able to mitigate that by doing something different in another part of the route, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does. I guess I'm referring to over the course of time. Whereas if there was an enforceable code in the city that prevented restricted access to a greater degree, over time that would save the citizens in whatever contract was presented. I realize it's small potatoes, but it was just a curious question.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay, Greg, looks like I see Erica popped up.
Yeah, Erica, you've got a request to unmute.
Okay. Hi. I just had, I'm unmuted, right?
Yes. You are. We can hear you. Welcome.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay. I from what I'm hearing, this is a big concern from the residents, and I don't understand exactly why people are allowed to park in the alleyway, also block the street. So that's a different issue, block the alleyway, but park overnight where without a permit. But then people, if like I want to park in front of my house, I have to have a permit to park in front, or like on the weekends, I could go out there and park overnight. But I didn't know like what exactly the difference is. There a technical difference between an alleyway and a public street? So is it considered a public right of way? And how do you guys, I know I heard like some towing was involved sometimes, but how do you go about helping the residents whose access is blocked, especially if they're just expecting a delivery? And regarding the South Hills, there are people still camping up there. I know you guys are going up there and trying to remove them, but I heard a little bit of the conversation. I had to run off. There was a problem. There really are people still up there camping right off the Bonnie Cove Trail too. And they have full tents, like in full view, but I can't do overnight camping, but there's a group that's overnight camping up there. So just want to say it. Okay, thank you.
Erica, we'll do our best to cover a couple of the areas. Let me take the homelessness issue in South Hills first. And as the chief mentioned, we have certain protocols in which we must follow under both Martin v. Boise and other rules that are in place on noticing and working with those individuals to provide services before we can do a cleanup. It is a constant process. It is nonstop and has been nonstop for a while now. At a super high level, Erica, and I'm unsure when you joined the meeting, the chief gave an update on the city's municipal code, which is largely to say many of our codes are several decades old, and alleys and roadways and arterials are all classified as public highways. And as such, the parking rules on many streets apply to the alleys as well. And the city for many years has not enforced overnight parking in the alleys due to there's no set of circumstances that we have that we can see, but largely when we did some of our survey, there are some neighborhoods that are more impacted than others by not being able to park in front of their house because they have a red curb or no parking signs, and sort of a case-by-case basis. Chief, if you wouldn't mind providing any clarification there and providing some context again, how we try to work with any homeowners that potentially have a dispute upon parking first.
Yeah, spot on. Alleys, just Erica, alleys and an alley and the roadway in front of your home are the same. They're one and the same. Why? And Adam hit it nail on the head with there was a decision at some point in the past. It predates my time here with the city, and I started my time here in 1990 when that policy decision was put into place that alleyway early morning parking was not going to be enforced. Mitigating circumstances between community members who have disputes or there's obstructions, we do our finest at solving the problem, at door knocking, making considerations, making concessions for some people and some allowances for others to park in other areas if it's a reoccurring problem. Most of the time our parking problems, and Erica went over the data, but just real quickly, it's fairly low number. And we've only had to tow one car in the last 5 years from an alleyway due to an obstruction. Most of the time we're able to mitigate those by door knocking and finding some common ground between community members. The struggle that we have from law enforcement is that the only code that we can go off of is the vehicle code, which by definition states that a vehicle that's blocking or obstructing the path of another vehicle. And so normally when we come across a vehicle that's parked in an alley, if I can get a police car by it or a fire truck can go by it, it's not obstructing, which means that it's not in violation of the vehicle code, which means that if it's not directly blocking another person's driveway, meaning it's sealing off that driveway from all access points and even in an opposite direction, then it's not a clear-cut violation of the vehicle code. The municipal codes that cities have entertained, and like the examples I put forth, they close that gap so that way it's clearly delineated for residences and community members what you can and can't do and what's clearly defined. And right now, it's not as clearly defined because we have to just go off the vehicle code.
And Erica, just to sort of close that loop, and just for everyone, just a quick reminder that when the 13th comes, we'll have the conversation with the city council and seek additional direction, which may include them directing staff to come back and look at some of those items that were raised this afternoon. So definitely more to come in a public realm and other options that are out there. Erica, did that answer all of your questions? Oh, it looks like we got one more follow-up.
Well, I just wanted to say it did, but I still don't, I don't know. I almost see it as like a safety issue. Like if the police are patrolling the alleyways, it would help. It's like a win-win situation for everybody. And regarding the parking, in the alleyway also. So then if somebody needs a late night medical service and they need to use the alley access to pick up the individual, but the alley's kind of blocked and it won't allow the person to go through. I just see like possibly a consideration to patrol the alleyways. It's safety for the residents as well. And because, I'm stuck on why I have to pay for a permit in front of my house, to park overnight. And the alley parking way allows for parking perpetually. It sounds like. So that's all.
Appreciate that, Erica, very much.
Mhm.
Adam, we have some questions in the chat that
let's get to those first.
Address. First one from Adrian Ferguson was asking, will you be addressing the church that blocks off the entryway of alleys to residents? Is that going to be continued to be allowed?
Is there any clarification as to the church location?
There was a follow-up. My question is regarding allowing non-residents who are next to an alley to close off the alleyway. Residents can't enter on that entryway. They also park next to the building which blocks the entryway. As they are not residents, will they be allowed to continue closing off the entryway? So no, the church isn't specified, but it looks like it's a question about non-residents.
Chief, are you aware of any parking concerns? Allison, aware of any parking concerns with an alley that's a public street, not a private street?
Oh, I'm sorry. She had clarified Glendora and Carroll.
I'm not aware of that, but it's something I can look into.
So quickly,
I'll have to research that. That's not coming to mind.
And I would just add that the only time we do restrict parking for non-residential areas, we do have some preferred parking zones in the city that are impacted, and only residents in that area can park there. There's a provision in our municipal code that goes over that process, and something that could be implemented depending on where it's at. But we'll definitely, Greg, if you could take down the contact information, we'll definitely take a look at the area and get back.
Will do.
I know the church now. It's Glendora Alliance Church, and it's the one just opposite the police department. I got you now. I'll have to take a look at that.
Okay, I'll get contact information.
Thank you.
Lena Nishiyama asked about a red curb in the front, alley in the back. Where does someone like a gardener park in those situations?
Right, and I think that's one of the issues that was talked about this evening, and something that when we had opening comments where, as a city as old as Glendora and varied as Glendora has changed over the years by major thoroughfares, for example, on Gladstone, having from stop sign to major commercial center, there are some inherent challenges that do exist with parking. And I think any solution moving forward, the city council is definitely cognizant of some of those challenges, and we'll definitely work at a staff level with the city council if any changes are asked of staff to work on those specific areas. But yes, in that specific case, you definitely need anyone dropping something off or doing any work to definitely access the alley.
Okay, next question is from Michael Perez. They say, appreciate that the city is being proactive with this issue. Is it still permissible to park on private property on the alley side? Example, in front of the garage.
Chief, you care to talk a little bit about the different sort of setbacks that we encounter and why sometimes having this conversation is a little more difficult?
Absolutely. I took a deep breath before I started to talk because it is a challenging, to answer his question, it's challenging. You stand on an alley, we're only humans, right? We don't have engineering minds where we can see, faint engineering right away lines and stuff. So oftentimes our parking employees and our police officers have to use our best judgment on what they're seeing. And so to that question, the answer is likely yes. if it's clearly your private property. But what we have found is that, and Allison can probably back me up here, is that we have a lot of alleys in various states of improvement and lack of improvement, and a lot of alleys where private driveways and private property have, and the lines have become rather fuzzy. And so where someone thinks they're parking on private property may actually be city property or vice versa. And so generally, yes, he is correct. Especially if it's a dirt or gravel portion that's off of the asphalt or concrete improved driveway, it's clearly going to be private property. It's no different than pulling into your driveway and getting off of the street. It would be a clear allowance. The problem is that not every place is just that clear. And so it would be a challenge. We'd have to go location by location. Allison, anything to add on that?
Not specifically. I will say that when we do projects like street resurfacing of the alleyway, I know that we know the width of the alleys, and we, pave up to our right of way, though there may be some extensions on people's like entrance or apron to their garages because we have a differential in elevation. So we have to take the pavement further. So I know that would just add to potential confusion as to where the property line may be, because everyone's garages are set back differently and built at different times. But I know when we do our designs, we basically will pave the 20 feet of a 20-foot alley and 15 feet of the 15-foot alley, but with potential extensions onto people's driveways just to match. So it's a smoother ride.
So if an enforcement opportunity presents itself by way of city council resolution and adopting some code for us, our officers and our parking employees to enforce parking or regulate parking in alleys, the answer is going to be, we're going to have to go case by case for a while until both the education component of identifying where that boundary line lies and how we would enforce it to that question.
Greg, what else do we have in our chat feature?
I'm sorry, Jasmine is asking, and what do cities do to accommodate the neighbors who would then have people parking with a permit in front of their homes? Jasmine has also asked, what are some of the options that other cities have given their residents who need to utilize their alley parking when they are enforcing no parking?
So I'll just at a high level, and then ask the chief, provide any clarification. The biggest call we get about parking actually is people parking in front of other people's homes. It's not illegal to park in front of someone else's home. And oftentimes we ask those neighbors to speak to each other to see if something can be done before we're getting involved. As for the alleys, Jasmine, if you saw earlier in the presentation, and if not, if you go back and tune in, you'll see the city went over several municipal code options, from an outright ban of parking with limited drop-off and duration like Azusa, to limited drop-off and duration with mandatory access of 10 feet like Pasadena, to a city like Covina, which is a ban but allows in certain areas, to a city like Laverne, which allows for parking in alleys as long as there's a 10-foot radius. So the city would definitely take all that into consideration when presenting options to the city council for approval. Chief, anything I missed there?
No, spot on. To her question about if a permitted neighbor parks in front of your residence, is that allowable? The answer is yes. There is no regulating authority that I have that can enforce where a person parks on public property. Meaning, if I wanted to park across the street in front of my neighbor's house every day of the week, I can do so. It's not very neighborly, but you can do it. And so her question is very poignant in this discussion, because if we have residents that have high density, meaning many drivers, many cars, maybe a work car and a personal car, and all the access is being used properly, they're in compliance and those permits are being issued, that's going to push that parking out further into the community and possibly impact neighbors. So it it was a great question. Unfortunately, there's no regulatory authority that I have to do anything with that.
Chief, this next question kind of touches on that too a little bit from Janice. It says, so if someone purchases an overnight permit for the year, will they be able to park in the alley as much as they want, even during the early hours with no violation of the vehicle code?
Presently, yes, as long as it conforms to actually, right now, they don't need one. They can park in the alleys. If council direction is to begin at some point by policy decision enforcing early morning parking, then yes, a community member could purchase a yearly permit provided they're following our standards. And yes, they would park in the alley as long as they were not obstructing the alleyway by vehicle code definition. If the council direction does some regulatory authority, like we've mentioned a couple of times now, and enacts an ordinance, then obviously that would change the scenario.
And Adam, Janice also asked, if there is a decision to change the parking, will there be a citywide vote held before any changes are made?
So this item wouldn't be pursuant to a citywide vote. Parking regulations, generally speaking, would come before the city council for approval. I think one of the things is this became more and more of a hot button topic. The more research we did, the more we realized that the varied impacts in areas of the city. And so, having conversations like this provides invaluable feedback to the city council members as they are presented with a discussion, but we wouldn't have a citywide vote per se. It would definitely be an action available and any changes to the city council.
Greg, before you take the next one, I do have a direct message that was forwarded to me. Did we answer a question from Brittany Villanueva? Yeah.
That's the next question.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Her question is, and again, this is from Brittany Villanueva. Her question is, are campers allowed to be parked in front of garage on alley along with 2 other cars?
Private property, yes. Public, no.
And I understand how that could be an interesting conversation, because in the front of a home, for example, we require a trailer to be behind a fence, and so the alley rear access creates some additional challenges there. So both pluses and minuses of having an alley behind your house and alley parking. So if there's a specific question that is presented that they would like us to take a look at, we'd be happy to head out if there's any consideration or any potential issues that exist.
Adam, she's actually on the call for clarification.
Excellent.
Perfect. Welcome.
Hi there.
Hi, Brittany.
So how do I know if it's private or public property? So like our carport is in the alley, and then on the other half of the alley is Pennsylvania. So their garage faces our carport.
Brittany, is there a way you can we can connect after this? I can send somebody out for a site inspection and get you an answer.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I would just add, Brittany, you highlight one of the challenges of older neighborhoods and alleys, where it is difficult sometimes to tell where the city's public right of way and private property starts and ends.
Yeah, it's really confusing.
It's challenging. It really is.
And there's 3 cars in our carport. So when all the cars are parked in the alley, it's like 75-point turn to get your car out without hitting someone. And it's like, there's parking on the street. You can buy the permit, I don't know what the rules are and all that. So yeah, if someone could clarify, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you can send Greg your information, we'll definitely connect.
Thank you.
Greg, any other questions in the chat?
No more chat questions, but we do have 2 more raised hands.
Perfect.
First one is from John Harold again.
Welcome back,
John. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you again. You guys are doing a wonderful job, but an issue was raised which concerns me. After spending 37 years in law enforcement and now spending my latter career as the local civil rights attorney, whenever I hear that policy is being implemented, in contradiction to possible city ordinances or law that concerns me. Erica raised a very good issue in that it appears that people are being treated differently depending on where they are. In other words, if you do live in certain parts of the town and you want to park a car, you got to pay a fee. But if you're in a different part of the town, you don't have to pay a fee. And like I said, that always raises red flags of unequal prosecution or, just unequal representation. So this is something I think we definitely are going to have to look at, because I thought it was being enforced all over town. I didn't think it, I don't have an alley by me. I don't normally go through alleys. And so I've not seen it, but I've been very familiar that people are paying money, including myself sometimes, to park on the street. And so Erica raised a very good point that I think we have to look at. And that possibly is why the surrounding cities of Azusa, Covina, and other cities have chosen the path they chose, which we may have to do the same thing.
Appreciate those comments, John. And I think more and more as we looked at the issue, we saw sort of the complexities that definitely exist. And West Covina and Covina, as you pointed out, definitely have options for both non-parking and allowable parking in alleys. So they take it as a case-by-case basis as well. So appreciate the additional commentary. Greg, anyone else with their hand raised?
Yes, one last one. Jasmine.
Okay.
Jasmine, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Andy, welcome.
Sorry,
Jasmine.
I had my hand raised and then you answered the question on the chat.
Okay.
But I do want to say thank you for such a good presentation. I feel like I learned a lot about everything, and I appreciate everyone taking their time to answer these questions.
Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to listen to us.
Of course.
With that, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, any closing comments that either of you would like to make? Any commentary that you have?
Yeah, and thank you to everyone that participated in this and asked questions. Thank you to staff and to our guests from Athens and LA County Fire. And to the point of trying to meet the needs of all the residents throughout the community, that is why it's important to have this conversation, because what may be an issue for one individual on an alley and one part of the city may not be the same concern or desire of a resident in another part of the city. So that's why it's important for us to gather as much information as possible before and if we decide to make any changes, to try to look at it from that holistic view. So again, thank you to everyone for putting this on and being part of it, and we'll continue the discussion and see what we can come to a decision on in the future.
And I could just add, first, I agree. Thanks to everybody. It was a great presentation, a lot of subject matter covered. I've got a page and a half of notes of trying to figure this out. It's more complicated now than it was when we started this conversation at 5 o'clock, but that's why we're paid the big bucks, I guess. But there's going to be a lot of things that are going to have to be looked into before any changes are made. And I want to address one comment that was made. Glendora is a pretty special place. And we, for the most part, have the ability to work very well with all of our neighbors to work these things out. And that's why a lot of times things like this work for 30, 40, 50 years without becoming an issue. But it is time to take another look at this. But for those that are going, why has this not been addressed before? That's exactly the reason. Because the people of this community do an amazing job working together with each other to live together and be good neighbors. So I want to thank everybody for that, and thank everyone for their comments and questions and everything tonight, because you brought up a lot of good questions for us to deal with. Thank you.
Any staff on the call would like to say in closing? Chief Egan, Jeff, Allison, Greg, any last comments that any of you have?
I would like to just remind everyone that this video is being broadcast right now on YouTube and will be available on the city's website after the meeting is over.
And with that, again, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Special thank you to both Athens and LA County Fire. We definitely appreciate the partnerships. We know you had a lot of homework to do on this topic as well and research. Special thanks to Chief Egan and Allison for all the research both of you have done as well, and Jeff for helping explain a lot of the zoning stuff to all of us. If you're still listening and out in the community, you have questions, please do not hesitate to ask. And again, July 13th, this will be on the City Council, a discussion, and I agree with the Mayor Pro Tem. I too have about a page and a half of notes of things that came up that we didn't even know were things. So we will definitely take a look at all those and get back to everyone, and appreciate your time this evening. Have a great night. Thank you, everyone.